Welcome to Killer Nurses Part 2, where we expose more of those monsters. Colin Campbell Norris, born on February 12, 1976 in Glasgow, Scotland, is a convicted serial killer and former nurse who was found guilty of murdering 4 elderly patients and attempting to murder another. His crimes took place in 2 hospitals in Leeds, England, in 2002. Norris's nursing career began in June 2001, but he quickly developed a reputation for being difficult to work with, particularly expressing disdain for elderly patients. The suspicious circumstances surrounding the deaths of his patients began to unfold when Ethel Hall, an 86-year-old woman under his care, fell into a hypoglycemic coma. Norris had predicted her decline earlier that day, stating to colleagues that he believed she would become unwell at 5:15 a.m. This alarming prediction raised suspicions when Hall was found to have been injected with an excessive amount of insulin shortly before her collapse. Investigators discovered that insulin had gone missing from the hospital fridge, and Norris had accessed it shortly before Hall's incident. Norris's pattern of behavior became evident as more patients experienced similar unexplained hypoglycemic episodes while he was on duty. He was the only common factor among these cases, which included Vera Wilby, Doris Ludlam, and Irene Crooks, each of whom suffered severe drops in blood sugar levels leading to critical health crises. Wilby survived her ordeal, but was also a victim of Norris's actions. The investigation into Norris's conduct revealed a chilling pattern. He had previously stolen drugs from the hospital and expressed a clear dislike for working with elderly patients. His colleagues noted his lack of urgency when responding to emergencies involving these patients and described instances where he displayed detached amusement during critical situations. In March 2008, after a 5-month trial at Newcastle Crown Court, Norris was convicted of 4 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. He received a life sentence with a minimum term of 30 years. The prosecution's case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence and expert testimony regarding the rarity of spontaneous hypoglycemia among non-diabetic patients, particularly in such close proximity in time and location. Despite his conviction, doubts about the safety of Norris's verdict have emerged over the years. New scientific evidence has suggested that the jury may have been misled regarding the nature of hypoglycemic episodes and their occurrence among patients not previously diagnosed with diabetes. This has led to calls for further investigation into his case. Norris's actions have left a lasting impact on the medical community and raised significant concerns about patient safety and oversight within healthcare settings. Mary Ann Cotton, born on October 31, 1832, in Low Moorsley, County Durham, England. Mary Ann Cotton was a British nurse and housekeeper who is believed to have been one of Britain's most prolific female serial killers. Executed on March 24, 1873, for the murder of her stepson, Charles Edward Cotton, she is suspected of having killed up to 21 people, including 3 of her husbands and 12 of her children. Her early life was marked by tragedy. Her father died in a mining accident when she was just 8 years old, and her mother remarried shortly after. At the age of 16, she left home to work as a nurse, but returned a few years later to become a dressmaker. She married her first husband, William Mowbray, in 1852, and the couple had several children, though many of them died young. Mary Ann and William Mowbray lived in Plymouth, Devon, and later in the northeast of England. William worked as a fireman on a steamship. The couple had around 5 children, but many of them did not survive infancy, which was not uncommon at the time. In January 1865, William Mowbray died of an intestinal disorder. Mary Ann collected a substantial life insurance payout after his death, which marked the beginning of a pattern in her life. Shortly after William's death, she moved to Seaham Harbor, where she quickly remarried. Her second husband was George Ward, a patient she had nursed back to health. The marriage was short-lived, as George died in October 1866 of intestinal problems. Mary Ann collected another life insurance payout, further raising suspicions about the pattern of deaths surrounding her. She then moved to Sunderland and married James Robinson in August 1867. James was a widower who had recently lost his wife and needed help caring for his children. During their marriage, James's children and one of their own children died of gastric fever. When James discovered that Mary Ann had run up debts and had stolen money from him, he threw her out of the house. Her financial situation was dire, and she was forced to move in with her mother, who soon died of hepatitis. Marianne's next target was Frederick Cotton, a recent widower with 2 sons. She took a job as his housekeeper and soon began a relationship with him. They married in September 1870, but Frederick died in December 1871 from gastric fever. Marianne once again collected a life insurance payout. Shortly after Frederick's death, his sons also died, leaving her with no remaining family members from that household. In the spring of 1872, Marianne tried to have her stepson, Charles Edward Cotton, committed to a workhouse. When the authorities refused, Charles Edward died suddenly of gastric fever in July 1872. This death raised suspicions, and a local doctor, Dr. Thomas Cream, ordered an exhumation of the body. The autopsy revealed traces of arsenic in the boy's stomach, leading to her arrest. Marianne Cotton's trial began in March 1873. The prosecution presented evidence of the suspicious deaths of her husbands, children, and stepchildren, all of whom had died of similar symptoms. The defense tried to argue that the deaths were due to natural causes, but the jury was not convinced. Mary Ann was found guilty of the murder of Charles Edward Cotton and was sentenced to death. She was hanged at Durham Gaol on March 24, 1873. The execution was botched, and she died of strangulation rather than the intended neck breaking. Her death marked the end of one of Britain's most notorious serial killers. The case of Marianne Cotton remains a chilling example of a person who exploited their position of trust to commit heinous crimes. Heather Irene Presti, born on August 28, 1982, is an American nurse and convicted serial killer. She is currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 380 to 760 years in prison. Presti was convicted of murdering 3 patients by lethal injection and is connected to the deaths of up to 17 patients in total. Presti's early life was relatively unremarkable. She was born and raised in Pennsylvania and attended the Community College of Allegheny County from 2003 to 2004, although she did not graduate. She began her nursing career in 2005 and worked in various healthcare facilities over the years. Despite her professional background, Presti's actions would later reveal a darker side to her character. Presti worked in 5 different nursing homes in western Pennsylvania from 2020 to 2023. She intentionally administered lethal doses of insulin to her patients, primarily during overnight shifts when staffing was low. Her victims ranged in age from 43 to 104, and many were already in poor health. Presti claimed that she believed she was ending the suffering of her patients, but her actions were deemed deliberate and intentional. The investigation into Presti's crimes began in May 2023 when authorities linked her to the deaths of several patients. She was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. During her trial, Presti pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and 19 counts of attempted murder to avoid the death penalty. She received her sentence on May 2, 2024, and is currently incarcerated at SCI Muncie in Pennsylvania. Presti's case has drawn significant media attention and raised concerns about the oversight and monitoring of medical professionals in nursing homes. Her actions have left a lasting impact on the families of her victims and the wider community, highlighting the need for vigilance and accountability in the healthcare profession. The investigation process revealed that Presti had a history of being disciplined for abusive behavior towards patients and staff. Co-workers often questioned her conduct and reported their concerns to superiors, but these concerns were not always acted upon. Presti's actions went undetected for years, allowing her to move from one facility to another despite leaving previous employers under investigation or amid concerns she was harming patients. Presti's case has prompted discussions about the need for better safeguards and oversight in the healthcare system to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. The Pennsylvania Healthcare Association has called for stricter regulations and more robust monitoring of medical professionals to ensure the safety and well-being of patients. The Lane's Angels of Death was a group of 4 Austrian nurses' aides who worked at the Geriatriezentrum am Wienerwald in Mainz, Vienna, and were convicted of murdering scores of patients between 1983 and 1989. The The group consisted of Waltraud Wagner, Irene Lydolf, Maria Gruber, and Stefania Meyer. Waltraud Wagner, born in 1960, was the ringleader of the group. She began working at the Geriatriezentrum am Wienerwald in Mainz, Vienna, and quickly discovered the power she held over her vulnerable elderly patients. In 1983, Wagner administered a lethal overdose of morphine to a patient, marking the beginning of a killing spree that would span several years. Wagner found a sense of control and power in her ability to end lives, and she soon recruited others to join her in the murders. Irene Lydolf, born in 1962, was the second member of the group. She was recruited by Wagner and became an enthusiastic participant in the killings. Lydolf worked alongside Wagner, assisting in the administration of lethal doses of morphine and other methods to end the lives of their patients. Lydolf shared Wagner's sense of power and control over their victims, and the two women formed a close bond through their shared actions. Maria Gruber, born in 1964, was another recruit of Wagner's. Gruber was a young nurse's aide who quickly became involved in the group's activities. She participated in the murders, helping to administer lethal doses of morphine and other drugs to patients. Gruber, like the others, found a sense of power and control in her actions. Stefania Meyer, born in 1946, was the oldest member of the group and was often referred to as the house mother. Meyer was recruited by Wagner and became involved in the killings. She participated in the administration of lethal doses of drugs to patients and helped to cover up the group's activities. Meyer's experience and age gave her a sense of authority within the group, and she played a crucial role in their operations. The group's method of killing was both cruel and methodical. They primarily used morphine to overdose their patients, but they also employed other methods, such as forcing water into the lungs of their victims, causing them to drown. The victims were often elderly and vulnerable, and many were already in poor health. The group's actions went unnoticed for several years, as the deaths were often attributed to natural causes. The Lyons Angels of Death were finally caught in 1989 when they began to boast about their actions in a local tavern. Their casual discussions about the murders raised suspicions among the patrons, who reported the conversations to the authorities. An investigation was launched, and the group was eventually arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. During their trial, the extent of their crimes was revealed. The group confessed to 49 murders over 6 years, but it is believed that they may have been responsible for as many as 200 deaths. The trial drew significant media attention, and the public was horrified by the group's actions. The case highlighted serious issues within the healthcare system, including the lack of oversight and the potential for abuse by medical professionals. Wagner was convicted of 15 murders, 17 attempts, and 2 counts of assault. She was sentenced to life in prison but was released in 2008 after serving her sentence. Lydolf was convicted of 5 murders and received a life sentence. She was also released in 2008. Gruber was convicted of manslaughter and attempted murder and received a 15-year sentence. She was released several years before Wagner and Lydolf. Meyer was convicted of manslaughter and attempted murder and received a 20-year sentence. She was also released several years before Wagner and Lydolf. Robert Diaz, born in 1938, was a nurse who became infamous for his role in a series of patient deaths at 2 Southern California hospitals in the early 1980s. Known as the lidocaine killer, Diaz was convicted of murdering 12 patients by administering lethal doses of the heart medication lidocaine. His actions led to one of the most notorious cases of medical malpractice and serial killing in the United States. Diaz worked as a nurse at Community Hospital of the Valley in Paris, California, and San Gorgonio Pass Memorial Hospital in Banning, California. In 1981, a cluster of patient deaths at Community Hospital raised suspicions among hospital staff and authorities. The patients, who were elderly and suffering from various ailments, died suddenly and violently after being injected with lidocaine, a drug typically used to treat cardiac arrhythmias. The investigation into the deaths revealed that Diaz had been on duty during each of the incidents. Authorities exhumed the bodies of 38 patients and conducted tissue tests, which confirmed that 12 of the patients had died from massive overdoses of lidocaine. The doses administered were found to be 10 to 20 times higher than the therapeutic amount, indicating deliberate intent to harm. In 1981, Diaz was arrested and charged with 12 counts of first-degree murder. During his trial, the prosecution presented evidence that Diaz had a history of stealing hospital drugs and had expressed beliefs in mercy killing. Despite his claims of innocence, Diaz was found guilty and sentenced to death by Judge John Hawkins Barnard. The trial and subsequent conviction made national headlines and plunged Southern California into a healthcare crisis, as the public grappled with the idea that a trusted medical professional could commit such heinous acts. Diaz spent 26 years on death row at San Quentin State Prison. Throughout his incarceration, he maintained his innocence and continued to deny any wrongdoing. His case became a focal point for discussions about the death penalty, medical ethics, and the potential for abuse within the healthcare system. On August 11, 2010, Diaz died of natural causes at the age of 72 while still on death row. His death brought an end to a case that had left a lasting impact on the medical community and the families of his victims. The lidocaine killer case remains a chilling reminder of the potential for individuals to exploit their positions of trust in the healthcare system to commit acts of violence and murder. Diaz's actions led to significant changes in hospital protocols and procedures to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. Hospitals implemented stricter controls on the administration and monitoring of medications, as well as enhanced background checks and oversight of medical staff. The case also underscored the importance of vigilance and accountability in the healthcare profession to protect patients and ensure their safety. Victorino Chua, born in 1965 in the Philippines, is a former nurse who worked at Stepping Hill Hospital in Stockport, Greater Manchester, England. Chua was convicted of murdering 2 patients and poisoning several others between June and July 2011. His crimes involved deliberately contaminating saline solution bags and ampoules with insulin, leading to a series of unexplained hypoglycemic episodes among patients. Chua's background as a nurse began in the Philippines, where he qualified and worked in various medical settings before moving to the United Kingdom in 2002. He joined Stepping Hill Hospital in 2009, where he initially worked without raising any significant concerns. However, in the summer of 2011, a series of unusual and life-threatening hypoglycemic incidents began occurring among patients on the hospital wards where Chua worked. These incidents prompted an internal investigation. The investigation revealed that the saline solution bags and ampoules used to treat patients had been tampered with and contaminated with insulin. This discovery led to a criminal investigation, with police and hospital authorities working to identify the individual responsible for the contamination. The pattern of incidents, combined with other evidence, pointed towards Chua. In January 2012, Chua was arrested on suspicion of murder and subsequently charged. His trial began in January 2015 at Manchester Crown Court and lasted for several months. During the trial, the prosecution presented evidence demonstrating that Chua had deliberately administered lethal doses of insulin to patients by contaminating the saline bags and ampoules. The prosecution argued that Chua had acted out of malice and a desire to exert power and control over vulnerable patients. Chua was found guilty of murdering 2 patients, Tracy Arden and Derek Weaver, who died as a result of insulin poisoning. He was also convicted of attempting to murder a 3rd patient, poisoning 20 others, and a range of other offenses related to the tampering of medical supplies. Chua was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 35 years before being considered for parole. The case of Victorino Chua shocked the medical community and the public, raising serious concerns about the vulnerabilities in healthcare settings and the potential for healthcare professionals to abuse their positions of trust. The investigation into Chua's actions also highlighted issues related to the employment and vetting of foreign-trained healthcare workers in the UK. Chua's actions led to a significant review of hospital practices and protocols to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. hospitals and healthcare facilities introduced stricter controls and monitoring of medical supplies, as well as enhanced background checks and oversight of medical staff. The case also prompted discussions about the need for better support and monitoring of healthcare workers' mental health and well-being. Aino Nikopkoski, born in November 1950, is a Finnish serial killer who worked as a nurse and was found guilty of killing 5 patients and attempting to murder 5 more between 2004 and 2009. She used sedatives and opiates to carry out her crimes, and no clear motive was established for her actions. Nikopkoski worked at various hospitals, care homes, and patients' homes during the time of her crimes. She was apprehended in March 2009, and her trial took place in Helsinki District Court in December 2010. Despite pleading not guilty, she was convicted and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 12 years before likely pardon. During her trial, it was revealed that Nikopkoski had an antisocial personality disorder and was deemed culpable for her actions. She was also found to have manipulated others using false empathy. Her sentence was upheld by the Helsinki Court of Appeals in March 2012, and the Supreme Court of Finland dismissed her leave to appeal in November 2012. The crimes of Aino Nikopkoski began to come to light when unusual patterns in patient deaths were noticed in several healthcare facilities where she had been employed. Investigators linked her presence to the sudden and unexplained deaths of patients, many of whom were elderly or vulnerable. The investigation revealed that she had administered lethal doses of sedatives and opiates to her victims, causing fatal overdoses. One of the significant challenges in her case was establishing a clear motive. Unlike some other serial killers who have articulated reasons for their actions, Nikopkoski's motivations remained elusive. This made her actions all the more disturbing, as they appeared to lack any rational explanation. The trial of Aino Nikopkoski drew significant public and media attention in Finland. The court heard testimonies from medical professionals, psychologists, and experts in pharmacology who detailed the methods she used to kill her patients and the impact of her actions on the victims' families. The defense attempted to argue that she was not fully aware of her actions due to her mental health issues, but this argument did not sway the court's decision. In 2016, Nikopkoski's case was once again in the spotlight when she applied for parole after serving the legal minimum of 12 years of her life sentence. The Helsinki Court of Appeals reviewed her application and ultimately rejected it in May 2020. The court determined that she still posed a risk to society and that her release would not be in the public's best interest. This decision underscored the severity of her crimes and the ongoing threat she represented. Throughout her incarceration, Nikopkoski has maintained her innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against her. She has also changed her name to Anne-Maria Milgren, possibly in an attempt to distance herself from her notorious past. Her case remains one of the most significant and shocking instances of medical professionals abusing their positions of trust to commit heinous crimes in Finland's history. Daniela Poggiali, born in 1971 in Italy, led a relatively quiet early life before becoming embroiled in one of the most controversial criminal cases in modern Italian history. Little is known about her upbringing or childhood, but she pursued a career in nursing and eventually worked at the Lugo Hospital in Ravenna. Known by colleagues as a diligent and hardworking nurse, Poggiali's early professional life gave no indication of the accusations that would later define her public image. Her career took a dark turn in 2014 when she was accused of murdering patients under her care. The case began when 78-year-old Rosa Calderoni died at Lugo Hospital. An autopsy revealed abnormally high levels of potassium chloride in her system, which can induce cardiac arrest if improperly administered. This discovery raised suspicions about Poggiali's conduct, particularly as Calderoni had been under her care shortly before her death. Investigators expanded their inquiry and found that 38 of 86 patients assigned to Poggiali over a 3-month period had died, a mortality rate far exceeding normal expectations. This led to allegations that she deliberately killed patients she found annoying or whose families were difficult to deal with. Witnesses described troubling behavior by Poggiali, including taking selfies with deceased patients and making sarcastic or disparaging remarks about them. These accounts fueled public outrage and painted her as a cold and calculating individual. The prosecution alleged that she used potassium chloride injections to kill her victims, citing statistical analyses that linked her presence during shifts to an unusually high number of deaths. Poggiali was arrested and faced 2 separate trials for the deaths of Rosa Calderoni and another patient, 94-year-old Massimo Montanari. In the first trial, she was convicted of Calderoni's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. In the second trial, she received a 30-year sentence for Montanari's death. However, both convictions were later overturned on appeal due to insufficient evidence and questions about the reliability of the forensic analyses used to implicate her. A key aspect of the case was the statistical evidence presented by the prosecution, which claimed that patient deaths were disproportionately high during Poggiali's shifts. Renowned statistician Richard Gill and his colleagues re-examined this data and identified significant flaws in the analysis. They argued that confounding factors, such as the timing of official death recordings and the natural mortality rates of elderly patients, had not been properly accounted for. Gill's team also noted that Poggiali was a conscientious worker who often extended her shifts, which could explain why she appeared to be present during more deaths than her colleagues. The toxicology evidence was similarly scrutinized. Experts pointed out that potassium levels can naturally rise post-mortem in elderly patients, undermining claims that Poggiali had administered lethal doses. These findings cast doubt on the prosecution's case and ultimately contributed to her acquittal. After spending nearly 7 years in custody, much of it awaiting trial or retrial, Daniela Poggiali was acquitted by Italy's Supreme Court in January 2023. The court ruled that the facts did not exist, effectively clearing her name after years of legal battles. Her case sparked widespread debate about the use of statistical evidence in criminal trials and highlighted systemic issues within healthcare institutions regarding oversight and accountability. Poggiali maintained her innocence throughout the ordeal, denying all allegations against her. Following her release, she expressed relief, but also frustration at having been wrongfully imprisoned for years based on what she described as flawed evidence and sensationalized media coverage. Her case remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of relying on incomplete or misleading forensic analyses in criminal investigations, particularly when dealing with healthcare professionals who operate in high-stakes environments where patient deaths are not uncommon due to natural causes. Miyuki Ishikawa, born on February 5, 1897, in Honjo, Miyazaki Prefecture, Japan, became one of the most infamous figures in Japanese criminal history due to her involvement in the systematic neglect and murder of infants during the post-war period. Ishikawa graduated from Tokyo Imperial University as a midwife in 1919 and later married Takeshi Ishikawa, a former Kenpeitai sergeant. Unable to have biological children due to a hysterectomy, the couple raised Takeshi's son from a previous marriage and adopted 3 other children. Miyuki later managed Kotobuki Sanin, a maternity home in Tokyo, which became central to her crimes. In the late 1940s, Japan was recovering from World War II, and poverty was widespread. Many of the infants brought to Kotobuki Sanin were born out of wedlock to mothers who were unable to care for them. Foster care options had dwindled due to economic hardships. Miyuki began neglecting these infants, leading to their deaths from malnutrition and lack of care. Her justification for this neglect was that the parents were too impoverished to raise their children and that society bore no responsibility for their survival. She reportedly charged parents substantial fees for her services, profiting from the deaths of these babies. The scale of her crimes came to light on January 12, 1948, when 2 police officers discovered the remains of 5 infants while investigating unrelated matters. Autopsies revealed that the babies had not died of natural causes. Further investigation uncovered more bodies and evidence of systemic neglect at Kotobuki Sanin. By this time, only 7 infants remained alive at the facility. Tragically, 2 died shortly after being rescued. Miyuki and her husband were arrested on January 15, 1948. During her trial, Miyuki claimed that the parents were ultimately responsible for their children's deaths because they abandoned them. This argument sparked public debate about societal attitudes toward illegitimacy and poverty in post-war Japan. On October 11, 1948, she was convicted of 5 murders by omission and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Her husband received a 4-year sentence. Both sentences were reduced on appeal, Miyuki's to 4 years and Takeshi's to 2 years. They were eventually pardoned under the Treaty of San Francisco in 1952. The case had significant social repercussions. It exposed widespread neglect in maternity homes across Tokyo, with reports revealing similar practices in other facilities by the end of 1948. Public outrage led to calls for stricter regulations and oversight of maternity homes and child welfare services. After serving her sentence, Miyuki lived a quiet life in Tokyo, working as a real estate agent and selling soap and fish. In a 1969 interview with Shuken Shincho magazine, she maintained her innocence and showed no remorse for her actions. By this time, her husband had passed away. She continued working until shortly before her death on May 30, 1987. Roger Dean, born in 1974, was a registered nurse in Sydney, Australia, whose actions led to one of the most devastating arson attacks in the country's history. Dean's background was marked by troubling behavior and professional misconduct. Before his employment at Quakers Hill Nursing Home in September 2011, he had a history of workplace issues, including being suspended from a previous nursing job due to suspected drug use. At another hospital, he was accused of sabotaging a supervisor's car by inserting screws into the tires and throwing paint on it. Despite these red flags, Dean secured the position at Quakers Hill without proper reference checks. His resume omitted critical details about his past employment and included outdated references. This negligence by the nursing home's management would later prove catastrophic. On the night of November 17, 2011, Dean was observed spending an unusual amount of time in the treatment room, where medications were stored. CCTV footage revealed he entered the room 36 times during his shift, and an audit later found that hundreds of opioid tablets, including endone and Kapanol, were missing. Staff suspected him of stealing the drugs and reported their concerns to police. However, due to other urgent calls, authorities did not immediately act on these suspicions. The following day, Dean learned that an investigation into the missing medication was imminent. In a desperate attempt to cover up his theft, he decided to set fire to the nursing home. In the early hours of November 18, 2011, Dean used a cigarette lighter borrowed from a colleague to ignite fires in 2 separate rooms within the nursing home. One wing housed residents, many of whom were elderly and immobile or suffering from dementia. The fire quickly spread through the building, which lacked a sprinkler system, a safety measure not yet mandated by Australian law at the time. The blaze caused chaos as staff and emergency responders worked to evacuate nearly 100 residents. Despite their efforts, 11 people died from smoke inhalation or burns on the day of the fire, while 8 others succumbed to their injuries later, bringing the death toll to 19. Dean initially portrayed himself as a hero during media coverage of the incident, claiming he had helped evacuate residents. However, his involvement came under scrutiny as investigators pieced together evidence linking him to both the fire and the theft of medication. He was arrested shortly after and charged with multiple counts of murder and grievous bodily harm. During his trial in May 2013, Dean pleaded guilty to 11 counts of murder and additional charges related to causing grievous bodily harm and drug theft. The court heard that he had been corrupted with evil thoughts and acted with reckless indifference to human life. Justice Megan Latham described his crimes as atrocious, highlighting the unimaginable suffering endured by his victims. Dean was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole in August 2013. An inquest into the tragedy revealed systemic failures at Quakers Hill Nursing Home, including inadequate hiring practices and a lack of fire safety measures, such as sprinklers. The coroner recommended reforms to prevent similar incidents in the future, including mandatory background checks for healthcare workers and improved emergency preparedness in aged care facilities. The Quakers Hill nursing home fire had far-reaching consequences for Australia's aged care sector. In January 2013, new laws were introduced requiring all Commonwealth-accredited residential aged care facilities in New South Wales to install sprinkler systems. The case also prompted widespread outrage over lapses in oversight and accountability within healthcare institutions. Families of the victims pursued legal action against Opal Aged Care, formerly Domain Principal Group, which operated Quakers Hill Nursing Home at the time. Roger Dean's actions remain a chilling reminder of how negligence and malice can converge with devastating consequences. His case not only exposed critical flaws within Australia's aged care system, but also underscored the importance of stringent safeguards to protect society's most vulnerable members. Terry Eden Maples Rachels was born in 1962 in Hopeful, Georgia, a small rural community. Her early life was marked by hardship, instability, and trauma. Raised primarily by her grandparents, she grew up in an environment of dysfunction. Both of her grandparents were alcoholics, and her grandfather subjected her to physical abuse. Her childhood was further marred by neglect and exploitation. At the age of 11, she began engaging in transactional relationships, exchanging physical acts for basic necessities like food and cigarettes. This pattern of exploitation escalated when, at the age of 14, she became pregnant after being raped by a friend of her grandfather. The child was given up for adoption shortly after birth. Her grandmother died around this time, leaving Terry even more vulnerable. Her grandfather subsequently evicted her from their home, forcing her to fend for herself at a young age. By the time she was 15, she had dropped out of school and turned to prostitution as a means of survival. Over the next several years, she struggled with severe mental health challenges, attempting suicide 6 times between the ages of 14 and 22. As Terry entered adulthood, her life continued to be shaped by instability and criminal behavior. She became involved in various illegal activities, including robbery, forgery, car theft, assault, and drunk driving. Despite these struggles and a lack of formal education, Terry sought to change the trajectory of her life by pursuing a career in nursing. She managed to enroll in nursing school and eventually became a licensed nurse. In time, she secured employment at Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. By all outward appearances, she had begun to rebuild her life and establish a sense of stability. However, beneath the surface, Terry continued to grapple with deep-seated psychological issues stemming from her traumatic past. These unresolved issues would later come to light in the most tragic and shocking way. In 1986, Terry Rachels became the focus of a major criminal investigation when she was accused of killing patients at Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital using potassium chloride injections. She faced charges for 6 murders and admitted to possibly committing 3 while in what she described as a fugue state, though she later recanted this confession. The case garnered significant media attention due to its disturbing nature and the questions it raised about patient safety in healthcare settings. During her trial, prosecutors argued that Terry had intentionally killed vulnerable patients under her care, while the defense highlighted her traumatic upbringing and mental health struggles as mitigating factors. Ultimately, she was acquitted of murder but convicted on 1 count of aggravated assault for harming a patient who survived the injection. She was sentenced to 17 years in prison and 3 years of probation. Terry served her full prison term and was released in April 2003. Her case remains one of the most infamous examples of criminal behavior within the nursing profession and continues to be studied as a cautionary tale about the intersection of personal trauma and professional responsibility. Petr Zelenka, born on February 27, 1976, is a Czech serial killer responsible for the deaths of 7 patients and the attempted murders of 10 others. He committed these crimes between May and December 2006 while working as a nurse at the Havlíčkův Brod Hospital in the Czech Republic. Zelenka used heparin, a blood-thinning drug, to cause fatal internal bleeding in his victims. His actions went unnoticed for months, as many of his victims were elderly or critically ill, making their deaths appear natural. Zelenka's killing spree began in May 2006. He administered unauthorized doses of heparin to patients who did not require it, causing severe internal bleeding that often led to death. Doctors at the hospital began noticing an unusual number of unexplained deaths and complications in the intensive care unit. Many patients exhibited symptoms consistent with excessive anticoagulation, such as uncontrollable bleeding and sudden drops in blood pressure. Despite these warning signs, Zelenka's actions were not immediately identified as criminal. In September 2006, Zelenka was dismissed from his position after hospital staff raised concerns about his behavior and the suspicious deaths occurring during his shifts. However, it took several more months for authorities to gather enough evidence to arrest him. During this time, Zelenka worked briefly at another hospital but did not commit further murders. In December 2006, police arrested Zelenka after concluding their investigation into the suspicious deaths at Havlichovgrad Hospital. During interrogations, Zelenka confessed to administering heparin to several patients, but later retracted parts of his confession, claiming he had been coerced by police. Despite this retraction, investigators were able to link him definitively to 7 murders and 10 attempted murders through medical records and witness testimony. Zelenka's motives remain unclear. During the investigation and trial, he gave conflicting explanations for his actions. In some accounts, he claimed he wanted to test the competence of doctors at the hospital by creating medical emergencies to see if they could save the patients. In other statements, he suggested that he acted out of boredom or a desire for excitement. Psychological evaluations conducted during his trial revealed no clear mental illness or psychopathy that could explain his behavior. Zelenka's trial began in early 2008 and attracted widespread media attention in the Czech Republic and beyond. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence against him, including medical records showing unauthorized doses of heparin and testimony from hospital staff who had grown suspicious of him during his employment. In February 2008, Petr Zelenka was convicted of 7 counts of murder and 10 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, the harshest penalty available under Czech law. The case had a profound impact on the Czech healthcare system. It raised serious questions about patient safety and oversight in hospitals, and prompted calls for stricter regulations regarding access to dangerous medications like heparin. Hospitals across the country implemented new protocols aimed at preventing similar tragedies in the future. Edson Izidoro Guimarães, born in 1957, is a Brazilian nursing assistant and one of the most infamous medical serial killers in Brazil's history. He worked at several hospitals in Rio de Janeiro, where he took advantage of his position to murder vulnerable patients. Guimarães confessed to killing 5 patients, but is suspected of being responsible for the deaths of over 130 individuals during his time as a healthcare worker. His crimes shocked Brazil and highlighted significant flaws in the country's healthcare system. Guimarães targeted elderly or terminally ill patients, many of whom were already in critical condition. He used his access to these patients to administer lethal doses of muscle relaxants or to disconnect life support equipment, causing their deaths. His victims were often individuals whose deaths might not immediately raise suspicion due to their precarious health conditions. This allowed him to carry out his crimes without detection for an extended period. One of the most chilling aspects of Guimarães' case was his motive. He reportedly killed for financial gain rather than out of any psychological compulsion or personal vendetta. At the time, it was common practice in Brazil for funeral homes to pay hospital workers for notifying them about patient deaths. Guimarães allegedly received payments for each death he reported, creating a perverse financial incentive for him to hasten the deaths of his patients. This practice, though unethical, was widespread and largely unregulated, providing Guimarães with an opportunity to exploit the system for personal profit. Guimarães' crimes came to light in 1999 when hospital staff began noticing a pattern of unusual deaths during his shifts. Suspicious colleagues reported their concerns to authorities, prompting an investigation into his activities. During questioning, Guimarães admitted to killing 5 patients, but claimed that he did so out of compassion, suggesting that he wanted to alleviate their suffering. However, investigators found evidence that contradicted this claim and pointed instead to financial motives. In 2000, Guimarães was convicted of 5 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment. While he confessed to these 5 killings, authorities believed that the true number of his victims could be much higher, possibly exceeding 130. The difficulty in proving additional murders lay in the fact that many of his victims were already critically ill or elderly, making it challenging to distinguish between natural deaths and those caused by Guimarães' interventions. The case of Edson Izidoro Guimarães had a profound impact on Brazil's healthcare system and public perception of medical professionals. It exposed significant vulnerabilities in hospital oversight and raised questions about the ethical practices surrounding end-of-life care and the relationship between hospitals and funeral homes. In response to the scandal, Brazilian authorities implemented stricter regulations governing hospital procedures and introduced measures aimed at preventing similar abuses in the future. Thanks so much for watching and sticking with me to the end. Please